Manufacturing enemies. The slide toward the war with China. Technically speaking, there was no Cold War. Technically speaking, it was World War III from 1945 to 1991. The damages and destruction that had caused throughout the planet, the so-called Cold War, was actually World War III. The same thing with the global war on terror was World War IV. Now we're going to World War V, or people will commonly prefer to call it as the Second Cold War. It's an unthinkable scenario, one which no one in their right mind would want, and yet we sit on the prestige of the unthinkable a war with China. The bellicose rhetoric became more noticeable during Trump's presidency, the first presidency, and has since elevated to another level after the COVID crisis. The US and its allies have been steadily building up military capabilities for years in preparation for a major confrontation in the Pacific. One gets the district feeling that China is being groomed for access and evil membership, right alongside North Korea and Iran. With ever increasing frequency, Western media beautifully portrayed China's leader Xi Jinping as the ruthless and cunning autocrat, aside from the familiar accusations of Chinese bullying in the South China Sea. There is also Western charges of genocide against the Muslim Uyghur population in the Xinjiang province, which that one is true. More recently, Western politicians and media blame a reckless Chinese Communist Party for unleashing the COVID-19 pandemic on the world, and the later charge may seem hyperbolic, but has been most effective in sharp increased Western hostilities towards China. There's also a real fear all this fighting talk will eventually reach a crescendo to settle the two opposing powers on a collision course that could radically transform the global system for the next century and beyond. It's no surprise that China would like to see the US out of Asia, but at what cost? Similarly, in a desire to maintain global hegemony, the United States aimed to knock China's economy and global influence down to a peg or two. Would they wage a world war to do it? At the very least, this has initiated a new international arms and cyber warfare race. Would it escalate into a intense hot conflict or a new Cold War with lower intensity operations and proxy wars stretching out over decades? Can this apparent drift toward conflict be averted, or will history repeat itself as the superpowers from different hemispheres with two different political and economic visions are drawn into a world war? Unlike previous US targets, China is a permanent UN Security Council member, set to surpass the United States as the world's largest economy and all the global influence that comes with it. Yet more than ever, there is a pervasive sense that confrontation between the incumbent Western superpowers and the emerging power of the East is becoming unavoidable. This geopolitical phenomenon has been referred to as the Diocletides trap, a term popularized by American political scientist Graham Allison that describes an apparent tendency towards war where one emerging superpower threatened to displace an existing great power as a regional or international hegemony. In ancient Greek, Thucydides was an Athenian historian, also known as the first historian or the first true historian, a military general who believed that the underlying cause of the Peloponnesian War was a fait accompli. It was the rise of Athens and the fear that this instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable, he explained. In other words, the opposing superpowers invariably find themselves in competition with one another, either in trade or over ideological and cultural supremacy, creating an unavoidable spiral toward confrontation. This concept applies to our inescapable psychological realities of human dynamics in a world of competing nations. If the scholar Ken Walsh, the author of Man, the State, and War, published in 1959, posits that behind the facade of diplomacy and international relationships exists a Hobbesian state of nature that is always in perpetual state of anarchy. Wall's theoretical work is credited for helping form the bipolar world order paradigm that dominated intellectual academic thinking in the Western world throughout the Cold War era and beyond. The bipolar world was succeeded by a unipolar world under the led by the United States and its allies following the rapid collapse of the Soviet Union and its satellite network countries. Speaking to the question of the foundational motivation behind the Ulysses trap, Walsh wrote, and I quote, "State in the world are like individuals in the state of nature. They are neither perfectly good nor they are controlled by law. Each state pursues its own interests, however defined its way is judged best, for its force a means of achieving external ends of state because there exists no consistent, reliable process of reconciling the conflicts of interest that inevitably arise among civil units in a condition of anarchy. With many sovereign states with no system of law enforceable among them, which each state judges its grievances and ambitions according to the dictate of its own reason or desire, conflict, sometimes leading to war, is bound to occur. End quote. As for judging the outcome of any conflict between great powers, Walsh did not hide his cynicism to the point of irrelevance, and his famously remarked, asking who won given a war. Someone who said it's like asking who won the San Francisco earthquake. That in a war there is no victory, but only varying degrees of defeat. It is a proposition that has gained increased acceptance in the 20th century. Walsh's harsh realist worldview never sat well with the liberal internationalists and true believers in the United Nations global government system who believe that world peace can one day be achieved through cooperation among nations and interdependency in many ways. There are two irreconcilable worldviews. Still, in the absence of the Kantian vision of the international utopia, Walsh does speak to some fundamental truth. Why people and nations do what they do, and insight that help us better understand that may save nations from sliding into undesirable wars. The first step, abolish NATO, establish a global security system. I'm just saying. Okay, in 2016, RAND Corporation document commissioned by the U.S. Army worked with China, thinking through the unthinkable. Online likely scenarios with war planners stressing that there is a limited window of opportunity to confront China, beginning close in 2025. After they argued China would achieve an irresistible level of global dominance and capability. They stated, and I quote, "We postulate that a war would be regional and conventional. It would waged mainly by ships on and beneath the sea, by aircraft and missiles of many sorts, and in space against satellites, and cyberspace against computer systems. We assume that fighting will start and remain in East Asia, where potential Sino-US flashpoint nearly all Chinese forces are located." End quote. The recent anonymous UK, Australia, and US or AUKUS defense pact was designed to do just this, using Australian base to increase their nuclear submarine capabilities. The US and UK can submerge for more extended periods to threat the Chinese Navy and ultimately disrupt Chinese shipping lanes and international trade through Southeast Asia and Pacific region. As for the nuclear question, geopolitical analyst Brian Berletic explained this polarity into this term in a recent interview, and I quote, "Is concerned because there are two nuclear armed countries. While it is unprecedented for US to start armed conflict directly with a peer or near peer competitor, it is also unprecedented that China is now in a position to pass the West." End quote. The RAND analysis stated that even if nuclear weapons were not used, China will resort to other ways of attacking the United States proper, mainly through space and cyberspace, meaning the public or commercial use of both domains would be severely curtailed during a protracted period of hostility. However, the US is prepared to deploy smaller, low-yield tactical battlefield nuclear weapons. With a sizable arsenal already, this could still be a step below high-yield nukes, which both sides would be reluctant to deploy. In such a scenario, however, struck first will have the upper hand and significant leverage for setting a higher risk threshold than their opponents. Unlike the US, China will want to avoid using any nuclear weapons near shore. For the globalists, all this might be a worthwhile sacrifice to make, especially if by the end of the long and costly war a global outcry emerged, clamoring for one world government, the final solution to keep the peace and curtail all our planetary wars. The US plan to contain China is nothing new. We can go back to the State Department document from 1965 entitled 189 Draft Memorandum from Secretary of Defense McNamara to President Johnson. And I quote, "The February decision to bomb North Vietnam and July proposed approval of Phase 1 deployment makes sense only if they are in support in the long-run United States policy to contain Communist China. China, like Germany in 1917, like Germany in the West and Japan in the East in the late 1930s, and like the USSR in 1947, looms as a major power threatening to undercut our importance and effectiveness in the world, and more remotely or more menacingly to organize all of Asians against us." End quote. More than anything else, China's new Silk Road project, also known as the Belt and Road Initiative, worries the Anglo-American world order. Through their ambitious project, China is attempting to develop a vast network and interconnected land and sea transport trade route to facilitate its future growth. Western plans like AUKUS are meant to thwart the Belt and Road initiate shipping lanes, while other destabilizing operations will be carried out at crucial land access points like Pakistan's Guantanamo port and Balochistan, as well as covert operations in Afghanistan. Disruptions in the Persian Gulf, instabilities in Africa's Sahel region, to name just a few. Interesting, McNamara's old memo foreshadowed many of these disruptive operations. There are three fronts in the long run effort to contain China, realizing that the USSR contained China in the north-southwest, the Japanese-Korean front, the Indian-Pakistani front, and the Southwest Asian front. Myanmar is the key node in the better roadmap with the pipeline transport fuel from the Bay of Bengal to the Chinese mainland. Operationally speaking, the US views any location that could potentially supply China with resources as a place of interest. In George Orwell's classic novel 1984, Great Britain was disparagingly referred to as Airstrip 1, presumably for functioning as Oceania's, likely presenting US Anglo-American atmospheric or unsinkable aircraft carrier parked on the European fringe. Similarly to AUKUS Defense Pact, formalized Australia's position as an Anglo-American outpost to project power across the Indo-Pacific. Henceforth, Australia becomes Deep Port 1, a platform to launch future naval and submarine operations against the People's Republic of China. This will see as an expansion of military operation in Australia's Northern Territory, with ports located around Darwin and possible plans to develop a new facility to Exmouth Gold in Western Australia. Former Australian military police, not military police, PM Paul Keating rebellion opposed the pact, telling off the then PM Scott Morrison, warning in a public statement that if we will amount to lock-in of Australian military equipment, thereby forces with those of the US with only one objective, the ability to act collectively in any military engagement by the US against China. The fact that this also makes Australia a bona fide target in an armed conflagration between two nuclear powers is of little concern to the United States, who are set to bill Australia a cool $66 billion for building its new group of nuclear powered submarines, hardware which still no doubt be managed and staffed by US personnel. It should be noted this scenario of Australia obtained nuclear powered submarines, which is now coming under heavy scrutiny as its predictability could be disinformation for co-op's real strategies. A report in the Times on 21 September, British nuclear submarine to use Australia as a base for Indo-Pacific presence, indicate they might be in the works. In the senior UK government source said the AUKUS pact could lead to the Royal Navy's £1.4 billion Astute-class attack submarines undergoing deep maintenance in the region that they can stay deployed for longer rather than returning to Foslane Naval Base in Scotland. The Times quote from Jace Predator, a former defense technology attached in Washington with experience in submarine technology, who said that a base in Australia could bring the power submarine right to the doorsteps of China. You can bring it in closer in a stealthy way. You can do intelligence and surveillance. You can project power. You can protection to surface warships. Britain will get to use facilities in Australia that houses nuclear-powered submarines. London is hailing the deal as a victory for its new Global Britain brand that is just the latest installment of the peripherous Albino having another go to the turn great game. If history is any guide, it's sure to leave a trail of chaos and destruction in its wake. It's no secret Australia has always been regarded by Washington and London as a convenient Asian Pacific backwater colony for its Five Eyes networks and global military industrial complex. Most notably its NSA signal intelligence satellite surveillance base located at Pine Gate, along with the joint military base around the country's coastal map. This provides an Atlantis power block with variable foothold at the gateway to both Southeast Asia and the South Pacific, so the change that they will release Australia from the political grip is slim to none. Due to its strategic importance, Washington and London always wield influence and power behind the scenes of Australian politics and will orchestrate regime change when the people elect a potentially unfriendly government in Canberra. Such is the case for the joint CIA M60 and ISO Operation 1975 to remove Labour Prime Minister Cough Whitham. Award-winning journalist John Bell will recall Australia briefly became an independent state during the Whitlam years. Since the coup, Washington had determined the Whitlam line in Canberra. This control influence continued into Hawke's ears, confirmed after the declassified release of secret U.S. Embassy cables in 2021. A paper by the Federation University's Cameron Convertry on the cable said that Americans value Hawks because he helped protect U.S. defense installations, provide information about Union disputes, and warn officials that installations could be targeted. Covering between the period 1973 to 1979, the cables revealed that Hawk worked intimately with the U.S. officials, notably Ambassador Marshall Green, on every key aspect of trade union and labor policy. Their other preoccupation was how to muscle rising opposition to the U.S. alliance as a result of the Vietnam War and protect highly strategic American military intelligence base in Australia. It's also worth noting that should be US and Britain wish to drag Australia into a war with China, the electorate would have no say in the matter, nor would there be any debate in Parliament. To declare war, Prime Minister only needs to notify the Ministry of Defense of his plans. Democracy at work, I guess. If a full-blown conflict with the US and China is initiated, the trigger will be over the island of Taiwan, located off the coast of the Chinese mainland. Along with the US allies, Japan and South Korea, Taiwan would make the ideal tripartite partner to counter China's power in the Pacific. Such alliance will have discussed but remain a remote fantasy under Beijing's enormous shadow. China's maintained that Taiwan is rightfully part of the mainland under its One China doctrine. Officially named the Republic of China with a population of 24 million, Taiwan is a diplomatic conundrum, no longer recognized as the official entry of the United Nations, but receives substantial political, trade, and military support from the US, which is a key chess piece on its geopolitical board in the Asia Pacific region. Many experts believe by 2025 China plans to seize control over Taiwan, a move that will effectively signal the end of Washington's predominance in the Pacific and maybe the world. At that point, there would be little the US could do to stand the tide of Beijing. Although technically speaking, the logistics behind the full invasion of Taiwan is very difficult, if not straight up impossible, compared to Germany's Nazi era trying to invade England. It was a complete failure. To invade an entire island is harder as making people out to be. When America first pledged its support to Taiwan, China was not today's emerging global superpower. So has Washington really checked it? We can be no longer cash. Historian Neil Ferguson writes, as a student of history, to quote Kissinger, I see very dangerous situations the U.S. commitment to Taiwan has grown verbal stronger even as it becomes militarily weaker. Perhaps Taiwan will turn out to be an American empire was Sus was to the British Empire in 1956, the moment when the Imperial Alliance exposed as a paper tiger. Has the US placed Taiwan in the firing lane to realize to protect its own global ambition? Either way, this part of the puzzle remains complicated but extremely important. The residents of Southeast Asia, also known as the ASEAN bloc, are not keen on the prospect of the US-led war on China. Former Malaysian Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir Mohamad interviewed the Australian Financial Review commented on the new AICOS deals. This agreement indicates that you can openly regard China as a possible enemy, that if it comes to the crunch, you might even go to war. Just imagine what war would do to Southeast Asia. His sentiments are likely shared with the rest of Asian neighborhood. All major trading partners with China and most enjoying cordial relations with Beijing given their very long history of managing China. As far as Washington and London are concerned, a war is on the cards, then a lack of enthusiasm for Asia is mere inconvenient to be managed. The Anglo-American tactic will likely fall back to its tried-and-true method of creating subverted client states by first showing chaos and instability, preparing the way for the usual Soros-style color revolution, followed by regime change operation. This seemed to be the case by Myanmar, with US-backed militants acting on the ground and usually human rights outcry for the media and Western NGOs condemning the government. With China's growing socio-economic and political treachery at the best of the US, its allies can only hope to play a spoiler and disruptor role in the region. Berlin agrees that Spain, and I quote, is incredibly insecure, is paranoid, is oppressive for time. In a world it's a world order trying to project confidence that everything they're doing is done out of paranoia and done out of fear of being surpassed by China. They're inflicting damage on themselves in the process. End quote. West America now realizes one of the great paradoxes of hegemony. Its biggest advantage during its rise to global dominance in the 20th century was that, Unlike its ally, it was prepared to sacrifice a significant amount of blood and treasure to achieve natural corporate interests, accrue spoilers and kudos of empire required to sustain its dominance over the last 80 years. This strength became its most significant liability. The current public and political appetite for costly endless wars and interventions now way thinner than at any point since brief isolation in the late 19th century or early 20th century. In reality, that political doomsday clock began counting down after the Vietnam War, went further into the red when America invaded and occupied Iraq. Certainly, in Western public's appetite for the war is not what it was, and in the information age, Western governments are also having a much more difficult time controlling the narrative. In the age of the internet, blogs, and social media, governments can no longer rely on the control legacy thread to serve the usual narrow, unchallenged versions of the events. Maybe the narrative writers of the new Ministry of Truth have fit up China to fill the role of new Soviet Union. As per Orwell's classic line, the enemy of the moment always presented absolute evil, and follow that any past or future agreement with him was impossible. In his speech on the 2019 Land Warfare Conference hosted by the Royal United Service Institute, or RUSI, Chief of the General Staff of the British Armed Forces, General Mark Carleton Smith, unveiled NATO's new approach to securing competitive advantage in the Anglo-American land of war order. The general admit how the rules of warfare are changing and need to update or risk being relegated to position outdated dominant relevance of the global stage. The geometry of the battle space is changing to the detriment of our conventional military advantage, he said, referring to the hybrid space that exists between these two inclusive redundant states, binary concepts, peace and war, artificial binary characteristics of strategic context that no longer exist today. In other words, there is no longer such a thing as a peacetime or wartime. Instead, reality is redefined as permanent state of alertness and threat against an amorphous foe known as the enemy. This new undefined, constantly evolving hybrid warfare spectrum illy echoes the constant conflict characterized by Orwell in 1984 as Oceania was a war with East Asia. Oceania has always been a war with East Asia. Presuming these state actors' enemies would be Russia and China, with others to be named later. In in their integrated operation concept document, the UK Ministry of Defence further redefined its new tactic as offensive in nature rather than traditional defense and assigning roles. The new language of war thinks imperial blusters and seems less with paranoia and doublespeak, protruding through militaristic rhetoric on these new enemies of the realm and claims. And I quote, their strategy of political warfare is designed to undermine cohesion, to erode economic, political, and social resilience, and to challenge our strategic position in key regions of the world. Their goal is to win without fighting, to achieve their objective by breaking our willpower, using attacks below, the threshold that will prompt a war-fighting response. These attacks are our way of life. From absurd authoritarian rivals and extremist ideologies are remarkably difficult to defeat without undermining the very freedom we want to protect. We are exposed through our openness. End quote. They essentially admit how they lost the battle for hearts and minds, both at home and abroad, rather than pause to take a more self-reflection on why this happened. The military mindset that reflectively blames the enemy for confusion the unsuspecting electorate of the free, democratic West. You can't help but notice fascist impulses yearning to break the tenuum of democracy while lamenting how we in the West are exposed for our openness. One of the solutions rolled out in response to this new omnipresent challenge is to treat free speech, expression, and independent journalism as a threat to their supposed political consensus across the Western Bloc. The persecution of Julian Assange and targeted of WikiLeaks can be viewed as top end of their plan to control global information commons. But the broader imperative includes everyone, right down to bloggers and individual social media users. Of chief concerns is information shared by the general public. Question they are posing their governments and independent analysis, in opinion, that threatens the legacy media monopoly over opinion forming in the West. To combat supposed disinformation and fake news, the UK government launched a gaggle of new cyber warfare units like the notorious 77 Brigade and other cyber regiments like the 13th Signal Regiment. Recently, the UK government announced a £5 billion to build a new digital warfare center of offensive cyber operations. You can't help but view all this preparation for a new war. The authoritarian language is subtle but chilling nonetheless. The old distinction between foreign and domestic defenses is increasingly irrelevant when fake news appear to originate not abroad but at home. It's against the credibility and reach, stalking confusion, disagreement, divisions, and doubt in our societies. This has been particularly evident with the significant uptick in disinformation and misinformation during the coronavirus crisis. You can translate doubt in our society to mean targeting everyday dissident speech or investigating journalists, expose government institutional corruption. The state and its military arm are attempting to bracket normal domestic oppositions and debate in a democratic society is something in league with the malign foreign influence, an approach not unlike that of the Nazi with the Minister of Propaganda speech, Joseph Goebbels, where his political party moved to gain control of the press and information in the 1930s Germany. Under the direction of the state, the military is turning its sight on its own population as they attempt to repurpose the heavily politicized fake news trope as a pretext to deploy information warfare resources in a domestic threat and internationally. More importantly, note how to respond to COVID sought to constantly remind the public that we are on war footing in the battle against the virus. Military assets were currently deployed in public space across NATO countries to help with COVID testing, vaccination, delivery fuel. In New York, military backfill vaccine caused thousands of military staff fired for refusing to take the experimental COVID jab. This is a gradual militarization of society during peacetime. Through the construction of a global pandemic state of emergency, governments have already established a state of war, and so transition into an actual hot, warm, or cold war will be seamless. The economic shock has already occurred. Expectations of comfort lower supply chain, severe travel restrictions, border shuts, and right and freedom suspended at home, including criminalization of public gatherings and public protests. Undoubtedly, this would diminish the natural opposition government expected to encounter when war is declared and things suddenly come to grinding halt. The integrated operation concept document continues. Home is no longer a secure sanctuary when we choose to launch interventions on it here. Away is no longer a regional horizon but a global one, involving space and the electromagnetic spectrum. Similarly, in the front no longer lies in some distant field of operation, but is within the port, airfield, or barracks. In true Orwellian fashion, the state's biggest fear is not some foreign military power, but mere information, even at the barracks level, with military brass and civil servants worried that their personnel might be corrupted by something they've seen or read online. This is not a rhetoric of free or open society, but rather a highly paranoid or totalitarian regime. Lurking in the UK National Security Capability Review in 2015 are concerned about the erosion of the rule-based international order, making it harder to build consensus and tackle global threats. Their radical new national security pretense will be backed up by legislation. The government hurriedly implemented its new UK Online Public Safety Bill, supposedly designed to protect people from online harms like abuse and hate speech by deposing social media firms with new authority to remove harmful and illegal content. Buried inside the legislation is moved to design official state narratives as democratically protected speech, which means anything challenging official narratives will be removed from parts of the internet they control, which quickly they arrive at this totalitarian determination that depends on the emergency of the moment. We already see government directing big tech to remove political posts or anything critical of the government or ruling party they did during and after the 2020 US presidential election to protect public confidence in our election integrity. At the time, U.S. Democratic corporate media painted it as a national security issue, and now with the last election, 2024, they used the same social media picture disinformation for the fascist movement to win. Invariably, this white legislative net will further expand to deal with extreme right-wing speeches, dangerous conspiracy theories, anti-vax, medical misinformation, all which are being jocosely scrubbed from YouTube, Google, Facebook, Twitter. These dangers cannot be overstated. This type of legislation not only formalizes state corporate censorship, but gives carte blanche to unfair official corruption by shutting down public journalistic opposition. This is classic fascism. There is threat also used to justify offenses and cyber operations to bolster the consensus across the NATO bloc. The consensus can be translated as the propaganda de jure propped up by the government media complex or the propaganda model that Trotsky has once said. Anything threatening its national security threat. That is precisely what was established in 2018 G7 summit in Canada when the UK PM Theresa May announced G7 rapid response mechanism, an agreement between the member states to streamline public messaging in any issue that might have national security implications. Think the manufacturing narrative of the Skripal Novichok attack in UK, or Doma chemical attack in Syria, or the Russian interference in Western elections, and notice how there are no deviation in the position G7 covers of these stories. This same level of political and information continuity will become paramount in the time of war and signal the end of sovereign independence for the individual countries. It is pure power politics, completed with entangled alliance and an instability to think and act independently. These were some of the perilous conditions leading to the catastrophic First World War. There is a new and disturbing school of thought creeping into Western discourse. That is, if the West is to defeat to overcome China's dominance, it needs to become more like China. Since on the onset of COVID crisis and the push to implement draconian new systems like it's clear that Western governments are embarking on a path towards authoritarian technocracy. Interestingly, the RAND Corporation War Gaming Exercise troubleshoot anti-war and pro-peace influence in the West. Characteristic is a threat to the war effort, or at least something to be overcome or neutralized, to persecute more successful war. Without explicitly stating, the tone suggests that war planners view inconvenient features of the democratic society as potential hindrance to the realizing strategy goals. It's almost as if they're saying, if only we could be more like China, including all the necessary domestic systems of social control firmly in place to run a long and uninhibited campaign at home and abroad. From Western wargaming point of view, the current disparity between Chinese authoritarianism and Western democracy or constitutional republic forms of governments gives China a distinct advantage in the ability to control its own population. The question is finally on the table. How might the West address this still maintain its moral and political high ground as the global standard bearer for democratic values in the rule-based international order? The signs are indeed worrying as we see a rapid transition by Western governments away from democracy and towards establishing rigid totalitarian systems at home. No doubt the global pandemic accelerated this tradition. Evidence is all around in us. Just as the Roman legion eventually lost the will to fight and would no longer give their blood for the glory of Rome, so too our American warriors approaching the triple web of imperial lineage. No money and security take precedent over the flag and country. As with Rome, wars fought for the other rim become increasingly cumbersome and expensive. Historically, the issue of money has been the core of sustaining global military dominance. In the long war with China, one of the US-led coalition comparative advantages is that business of war is much more profitable racket than for China and Russia. As long as the fiat magic monetaries keep failing water, with financial engines will hold on to allow governments to maintain an arms race while keeping population content at home. Historians typically focus on military status as metric for an empire in decline rather than the country's internal societal failure as a prognostic for sovereign decay. For the NATO bloc and the West in general, the signs are clear: a new exponential growth in the size of government in the last 50 years, failing an overinflated fiat money system, an increasingly opaque and bloated surveillance state, a more militarized society, an intelligence agency Leviathan, an entrenched deep state, which is basically the CIA, and increased and the FBI as well. To global institution and government, the fetishism of identity and cultural wars and sinking educational system, incredible wealth gap, the capture of government by industry lobbyists and corrupted for a state, the rise of synagogue valleys, privatized censorship, farms that are subsidized, eliminate free speech. Additionally, America is more divided politically now than at any time since the Cold War era. And divided house cannot stand, let alone fight and win a war. Western nations are currently look in an unforgiving green great reset globalist overhaul because of the right-wing fascist accelerationist politics that I subscribe to. Este, Lastly, show a military showdown occur. China has a home field advantage, which means that while the US is saying will make life extremely difficult for extended period of the time on the Chinese mainland, the West will not be able to persecute war halfway across the globe forever. With its size, human resource infrastructure, and food production capacity nearly 90% food self-sufficient, China can withstand long-term trade disruption and the diversion of resources. Moreover, if the West attacks China, this will galvanize domestic support behind the government of Xi Jinping, boosting resilience in China's defensive posture for a protectorate conflict. Another important factor is the Anglo-Americans will be waging war on the other side of the globe. This fundamental lesson the U.S. coalition will have learned from Afghanistan, a decade-long dirty war against Syria. But why have they? But what if the US cannot prevail by conventional means and resort to unconventional methods to bring its opponents to heel, as they did with Japan during the waning moments of World War II? If conflict comes, there will be those in the US who demand the nuclear option, and like with World War II, the longer the war, the louder the calls for humanitarian warhorse to just drop the bomb and bring this war to an end. One can only hope that the threat of nuclear retaliation by multiple countries and a great human environmental toll to ensure we're enough to deter Oppenheimer's destroyer of worlds. At the center of power at the moment, China appears to have slight advantage should a confrontation arise, at least for the time being. But that could change if the US succeed in fomenting domestic unrest and instability within China's border. For all the reasons cited, and people lack of military prowess or solid weaponry, we can expect to see a gradual devouring of America and its satellites, a one-day Western civilization should. History also tells that this will likely be a long, painful, drawn-out process, something lasting centuries. Time will tell what will be naive not to heed in any glaring warning signs at this turning point in history. And this is the failure of the nation states. This is not democracy. Capitalism is inherently a destructive force of nature.